I've been trying to give myself curtain bangs, but I don't think it really works because I don't have a middle part and my hair is a little bit too curly for them to sit nicely. But anyway, we're just gonna have to go with it. This video is the top 10 films that I watched last year. It's not necessarily a favorites of every film that came out in 2021 because I haven't seen all of them yet. It's just the fact of living in Australia that a lot of the, especially Oscar bait films, don't really come out until either this month or even later. I have caught up on some films, but I am going to be a stickler and just stick to the ones that I actually watched last year. I thought I'd start with a few honourable mentions, mostly because these ones got terrible reviews and I personally quite enjoyed them. So firstly, we have Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is the newest reboot of the Ghostbusters franchise. It's directed by Jason Reitman, who is the son of the original director Ivan Reitman, and a lot of the bad reviews just said it was like nostalgia fodder, it was just full of Easter eggs, the plot was exactly the same as the first Ghostbusters movie, and I'm sure all these things are true. I'm not a big enough fan of Ghostbusters to have got hardly any of the Easter eggs, and certainly the plot of Ghostbusters is so hardly the point that it didn't really bother me whether it had the same kind of plot. What I loved about this film is it's actually quite different in that it's from the point of view of a group of children, and so in that way to me it felt much more like it was inspired by the Goonies style 80s movies where children were genuinely the protagonists, like real family films that don't seem to get made that much anymore. The main character is a girl called Phoebe and she is so clearly coded as being autistic. They never actually say that she is autistic, but it's pretty clear that that's what she's meant to be, and I just love that an autistic girl was the lead protagonist of a big film like this. And I kept thinking about if I'd been able to see a character like that on screen when I was a kid, I would have been blown away. I would have loved her so much. I also thought it was really funny. Very much enjoyed Paul Rudd. I loved the ghosts. My biggest qualm with the film was that there were just not enough ghosts. There could have been way more for a film called Ghostbusters. Another film that is also a fun time is Venom: Let There Be Carnage. I watched the first Venom for the first time this year in preparation for seeing the sequel, and I loved it so much. I really don't like superhero movies. I find they take themselves so seriously and there's so much of it that even the idea of trying to catch up with all of it exhausts me, so I just have decided to not engage with it at all. But I've heard that Venom was a very different kind of superhero movie, and it really is. It is the opposite of taking itself too seriously. It might be one of the silliest films I've ever seen, but it was so much fun. Tom Hardy just dedicates himself to this character and this symbiote, as actual Venom is called, which is this alien that is like attached himself inside him but can also sometimes like come out of him as well. And the nice thing about it is that Venom is technically a bad guy, like he wants to eat people, and so him and Tom Hardy's character have to come to an agreement to fight off an even bigger bad guy. And then in the sequel they just amp up this relationship even more because that is clearly the best part of these films, and they're just so silly and so funny, and they didn't even really need to write a plot. They could have just had an hour and a half of Tom Hardy talking to himself because he also plays Venom as well, but they did obviously feel obliged to include a plot, and that was definitely the weakest part of the film. And then my other honourable mention is Last Night in Soho. This is Edgar Wright's latest film about a girl called Eloise who is obsessed with the 60s and moves to London to be a fashion student. In her dream she finds herself travelling back to the 60s and observing the life of this glamorous wannabe singer called Sandy, played by Anya Taylor-Joy. It's got quite a lot of criticism and I completely understand why. It has a very black and white view of the sex industry. It's so over the top in the way it's like, look at all the bad things that happened to women who are in the sex industry in the 60s. And like obviously lots of bad things did happen, but it's not very constructive to be making a film like that in this day and age when it's an industry that people still struggle to get their heads around now. It is very over the top. It's very style over substance, but that aspect of it I did not mind at all. Edgar Wright's films just have a way of creating such an atmosphere and such an insular little world that they just make me leave the cinema always wanting to either be in that world or just be able to make worlds like that myself. He is really effective at getting his imagination on screen. I think if you go into it knowing that it's not going to be the most airtight plot, then I think you can have a really good time with it. And as usual with his films, it has the best soundtrack, and I've just been listening to a lot of 60s music recently, and so I very much enjoyed that aspect of it as well. Alright, so I'll start on the actual list, which I have put in order to like go up to my number one favorite of the year. So number 10 is the Fear Street Trilogy. This was a trilogy of horror films that released on Netflix in July, I think it was, over 3 consecutive weeks. and I'm not a horror fan at all, but I think I'm slowly becoming more interested in the genre just by exposing myself to it, which I do generally at Halloween time. I've tried and watch at least one classic horror film, and I'm finding that they're not as scary as I thought they were going to be. At least the ones that I've been watching so far. So Fear Street kind of intrigued me because Netflix did do quite a big campaign for it, and it felt like it was going to be perhaps a more scary Stranger Things style film. I wouldn't say it's that much like Stranger Things. I mean, it does have a similar atmosphere perhaps because it is something set in the past with teenagers as the lead characters, but that's kind of where the comparisons end. Each one is very much influenced by horror films of their era. The first one is really leaning into the 90s slasher type genre like Scream. The second one is set in the 70s and so is inspired more by horror films from that era, and then the third one is partly set in the 1600s and very much has the witch vibes going on, if anyone knows that film with Anya Taylor-Joy in it. Each film has its own individual plot and like bad guys that the children are running away from, and it's very gory. There is a lot of blood, a lot of people die, but the overarching plot is about this witch that was hanged in the town in the 1600s and how she periodically comes back to murder a bunch of people, and she will bring to life corpses to do her dirty work for her, basically. I just was really impressed. I thought they were really good films. I love the way that they each furthered the overarching story, got to really care about the main characters as well. Two lead characters are also in a lesbian relationship, which was just something that just existed, and that was really lovely to see. And I felt like this was such a good way of releasing them as well. It was really fun to sit down for 3 Friday evenings in a row to watch the newest release. I felt like it really ended in a very satisfactory way as well. So if you are a fan of slasher type horror films, I would definitely recommend these. At number 9, I have King Richard. This is a film starring Will Smith as the father of Serena and Venus Williams. And it's a story that, if it wasn't true, would just be the most ridiculous, nonsensical story you could imagine. But apparently it is all true. He was very ambitious for his children. He had other daughters as well. And he was determined that Serena and Venus would become tennis champions. And he specifically told Venus that she would be number 1, and he told Serena that she would be one of the greatest players ever. And the film just sort of follows them from when they're still training in their local tennis courts up to where he manages to persuade a tennis coach to take them on, and then up until Venus's first big tournament. The trailer really gives the impression that this film is like a worthy biopic sort of thing, like very Oscar bait. My main takeaway from the film was that it is so funny. Will Smith is so funny in this. I obviously know that he came from comedy originally, but I think as long as I've been aware of his films coming out, it's all been his sort of serious dramatic work, and so that's kind of my impression of him. Just the most incredible comic timing, but also without taking away from the emotion of the story. Like, it is very emotional about this father who they do refer to the fact that he wasn't like this perfect person in any way, but how he was just so determined to give his children this better life, and like had this crazy dream for them that everyone else dismissed. There is one bit where someone says, "Why don't you try basketball?" And he says, "No, they're going to be the greatest tennis players because it is a white person's sport." Biopics often have such a formula to them, and I think this one did really well in trying to not follow that formula to the letter, but also still making it a really engaging and linear story as well. I knew nothing about the history of Venus and Serena Williams, and obviously as long as I've been aware of things, they've been huge tennis stars. So the idea that of course they once weren't tennis stars and that people thought that black women could never be good at tennis is like mind-boggling to me. Yeah, so this film was just so fascinating. Such a fascinating story, but hugely entertaining as well. At number 8, I have The Power of the Dog. This is a Jane Campion film that came onto Netflix late last year. It stars Benedict Cumberbatch as this cowboy who is just basically the worst guy ever. He loves to belittle people on this like cattle ranch that they live on, and he especially loves to belittle his brother's new wife, who's played by Kirsten Dunst, and her husband is played by Jesse Plemons, because obviously they're together in real life. Kirsten Dunst's character already has a son from a previous marriage who's played by Cody Smith-McPhee, who's an Australian actor who's always had a very interesting face, but he uses that interesting look that he has to full advantage in this film. He is so good. Him and Phil, who's Benedict Cumberbatch, sort of develop this very strange relationship with each other. It's definitely a slow burn, this one. It is a sort of slow western filmed in New Zealand, but you would never know they are pretending that it's Montana, and it just goes to show how versatile New Zealand is. Like, it can be Mordor, it can be Montana. The film is sort of divided into different sections, and different characters kind of get top billing in each of these different sections, so you really do get a full insight into every single main character here. A fun part about watching something that's filmed in like Australia or New Zealand is picking out Australian actors or New Zealand actors playing bit parts, and I definitely picked a few that I recognised. It is very slow. There were parts where I felt it dragged a bit and I was sort of wondering where it was going, but the ending was so good that it just made up for all of that. At number 7, I have a film called Games People Play. This is a Finnish film that I got to watch at a media screening for the Scandinavian Film Festival. Very often the film that they pick for that festival is a like moody, depressing noir. So possibly my enjoyment of this film was just being happy that they picked a comedy. But this is about a group of friends. They've all traveled to this house on an island that they all used to stay in when they were younger to celebrate the birthday of one of the friends. She is just separated from her long-term partner, and so this kind of brings up some old romances with another character. There's lots of rivalry and tension between different siblings and different characters. The partners that some of the characters are brought in feeling like outsiders. It's a really classic film where you put a bunch of people in a small isolated place together and just watch what happens. I found it just so delicately done. Like, it was very funny, but all the characterizations were not broad. It felt like the film didn't have any kind of agenda. It was really just presenting these characters to you, and you just watch what happens unfold. There's kind of a little theme running through it where the characters often sort of think the whole world could be ending and they wouldn't know because they're so isolated on this island. And also it's set in summer, so obviously that far north the sun is not setting at all. It always felt like maybe it's going to turn a little sci-fi, and it doesn't actually in the end, but I think that's such a nice little aspect, and it sort of goes along with the fact that these are characters who are reaching their 30s and realizing they're no longer young anymore, and that they haven't fulfilled the dreams that they probably thought they would have by that age. There's lots of themes undercurrent there, but the main part of the story is these characters' relationships. And number 6, I have In the Heights. This is a musical that was originally a stage musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda. It was his musical before he created Hamilton. Now, I'm one of those people who didn't enjoy Hamilton that much. I've only seen the filmed version on Disney+. So when I absolutely loved this film and the music of this film, it made me realize that maybe I would actually like Hamilton if Lin-Manuel Miranda was not playing the main character. But yeah, I love this so much. It was just this big, bold, colorful musical, so reminiscent of classic musicals while also being like obviously up to date and modern because it is about the Latina community in New York. Interestingly, I did see West Side Story recently, and even if I'd seen it last year, I don't think it would have made my top 10. In the Heights was kind of what I wanted West Side Story to be. I weirdly felt West Side Story to be very insular, and a lot of the musical numbers, aside from like a couple, just felt very small. Maybe that's just West Side Story. It is more of a small story than I remember. I feel like if you're wanting that big, bold, old-fashioned style musical, go for In the Heights. It's such a good time. At number 5, I actually have a documentary called The Sparks Brothers, and this is another Edgar Wright directed film, and it's his documentary about the band Sparks. I knew nothing about Sparks. I'd never heard any of their songs. I vaguely recognized them, especially the guy with the moustache. It's very iconic looking. I didn't leave the film like wanting to listen to their music either, but it is such a fascinating documentary that not just looks at them as a band, but looks at the evolution of like recent music in huge detail, because they have been active and making music since the 60s basically, all the way up to the present day, and they were so ahead of the genre every single time. Like, they made an 80s synth album in the late 70s. So interesting that these two guys can have so much influence on sort of Western pop music and yet also be two very humble, very nice people. They are real brothers. They 100% are not doing it to be famous. They just love creating music together, and that's it. And it makes the documentary not about like their personal lives so much. It is really more about music. At number 4, I have Riders of Justice. This is a Danish film starring Mads Mikkelsen. The poster of this film is very misleading, and I suspect it might have been done on purpose because it may have been to try and attract an audience that might not have watched it otherwise. Mads Mikkelsen plays a soldier who has to come home because his wife dies in an explosion on a train, and he has to come and take care of their daughter. Meanwhile, these two sort of nerdy men think they've worked out that the explosion on the train might not have been an accident as had been reported, but might have been a bomb, and so they come to Mads Mikkelsen and tell him their theory, and so they decide as a group that they're going to retaliate in revenge. It is surprisingly comedic, this film. There is a lot of comedy that arises from this gruff soldier character that Mads Mikkelsen plays and these bumbling nerds that he reluctantly befriends. And then you have his daughter who is trying to persuade Mads Mikkelsen that they should seek therapy. And so when these nerds come along, Mads Mikkelsen, just as an excuse as to why they're hanging around all the time, says, oh, well, here are the therapists. They end up creating this lovely relationship with this father and daughter. The film ends up being about how men need to talk about their feelings, and as friends need to support each other, talk to each other, not feel that talking about things is unmanly. And it does it in such a lovely, sweet way. And I think the film is really trying to reach an audience that it might not otherwise reach, hoping that it might change the opinions of a few men who might have been like the Mads Mikkelsen character. At number 3, I have The Map of Tiny Perfect Things. This is a very YA teenage film. It was an Amazon Prime original, and it is about these two teenagers who discover that they're in a time loop together. The girl has been in the time loop for a lot longer than the guy, and they sort of come up with this wild theory that maybe they're in this time loop because they need to find occurrences in this one day where a perfect thing happened, and they mark it out on this map. It feels like it was based on a YA novel. It was actually based on a short story that was adapted to the screen by the same writer, and it's just a really lovely YA film. Basically, the two leads are so charming. It is Kyle Allen, who's also in West Side Stories, and Catherine Newton, who's just, I feel like an actor who's really underrated because she doesn't necessarily do big serious roles, but I think she's really good. It's not as schmaltzy as you think it would be. It is really sweet, and I thought the way it was filmed was very aesthetically pleasing, but definitely held up by its two lead actors. At number 2, I have My Salinger Year. This is a film I watched probably a year ago because I remember watching it by myself in the tiny little cinema that I live next to with a bunch of seniors on a Sunday morning, which is just the perfect way to watch a film. And this is based on a memoir, which I haven't read yet. I do have it and I keep meaning to read it, but it stars Margaret Qualley as an aspiring writer who gets a job in a publishing house that publishes J.D. Salinger's work. And it's a little bit Devil Wears Prada in that she has this very demanding boss played by Sigourney Weaver, but it's not like Devil Wears Prada in that it's much more realistic, and the boss is actually quite a nice person but just expects people to do their jobs properly. I thought it was just a really sweet story about writing and writers. What I really connected with was it's about what happens when you get an office job, which in your head you think, oh, this is just to make some money while I do my own writing, but actually you kind of get really into the office job, and especially if you're good at it, you start to be really proud of your work and wonder, maybe I should just do this forever. Why struggle trying to be a writer when you can actually make a comfortable living doing something that is relatively fun? So heavy relate to all of that. And at number 1, I have Shiver Baby. I got to see this twice last year, which I'm very pleased about because it confirmed that I just love this film. I watched it first as a screener at home, and then I got to watch it at the cinema, and we got free bagels, which was so good. This is a film set all in one day, which I love. It's about a girl called Danielle who that morning has met up with her sugar daddy. She's just about to graduate university, and she's rushing to meet her parents to go to a shiva, which I believe is the Jewish version of a wake, like after the funeral. I might be completely wrong about that, but that was the impression I got from the film. And when she's at the funeral, not only is her ex-girlfriend there, but her sugar daddy shows up as well, and it turns out he's married with a child and is friends with her parents. This film almost acts like a horror film in the way that it's shot. It's so claustrophobic. Danielle is constantly surrounded by people at all sides. She's constantly trying to hold down her emotions at seeing the person she's been having sex with right there in front of her, talking to her parents, at her relatives nagging at her, asking her what she's going to do now she's graduating, trying to hide from her ex-girlfriend who is going to become a lawyer and just seems more successful than her. It also has this amazing horror score on strings, just these plucking strings that get louder and louder as she gets more and more close to having a panic attack. And it's just such an intense, short little film, but so good. It's so well acted, and it's also just so funny as well. My friend and I, after we watched it at the cinema, we both agreed that it felt like the first film we'd seen that feels like a film made in the 2020s. Like, it just very much feels like it's reflecting how young people feel now, and written by an actual young person. The director and writer, Emma Seligman, is my age, if not younger than me. Highly recommend, and I'm just so excited to see what this director and that lead actor does next as well. So thank you for watching. Let me know what films you would recommend from last year that I should see, and I will see you soon. Bye.